You don't respect me because I'm a well-behaved black woman with a pointy nose. You respect me because I'm an upper-class black woman with a pointy nose.
Hey ladies, welcome back to my channel. It's your host London Lamborghini, and in today's video we have a very special compilation from Alex Beto, who is a 28-year-old mixed race lawyer who very thankfully makes TikTok videos about her experience growing up in Western society in the upper class, and also her experience of deconstructing racial ideology through the books that she reads and the articles that she reads and a lot of other social commentary. So go follow her on socials and let's get into the video.
You don't respect me because I'm a well-behaved black woman with a pointy nose. You respect me because I'm an upper-class black woman with a pointy nose. And that's a distinction people will do everything to avoid making. I've already talked about how I live in one of the wealthiest towns in America, and I have literally lost track of how many space billionaires have moved into the neighborhood. The resources I've had access to are unmatched. And yet there are people here who love to talk about how I'm where I am because of good choices that I made, and that I'm a respectable person, and that if other black people behaved like me and my siblings, maybe the problems we see wouldn't happen so much. That's a cop-out. Categories of blackness and whiteness were created to create a white supremacist state. These categories took lots of different ethnicities, distilled them into two different parts, as I've said before, to make sure that this access to wealth, resources, land, and power only stayed in the hands of a group of a few people. The advantages and the privilege of that class structure persist to this day. These are advantages people like me benefit from. I work in juvenile justice, and one of the things I've realized in my life is because of my class standing, I am not walking a tightrope. I have space to make mistakes and get back up on my feet, whereas other kids don't have that same option. I'm not building a life with two hands tied behind my back trying to fight against structural inequalities that destroy my health, my access to good education, or my ability to have opportunities that help propel me further in the world. I'm not intriguing or relatable or interesting because I made some great moral choice. I'm that way because my parents paid for me to be like that. I've had insane access to things that were historically only available for white people. I absolutely adore my country, and I know that living here I have opportunities I wouldn't have in many other places in the world. But I am not the product of this great American meritocracy. I am its exception. Choices matter, but if you frame my life through good choices that I've made, you can hide the fact that structural inequality and class systems are at play. And one thing that makes Americans more uncomfortable than even race is discussions of class, because class is that secret, invisible thing that's not supposed to be real in America. But the deeper we get into understanding American history and the role that the fiction of race and these social constructs have on us, the more we start to realize what they serve, and that's the class system. You can't use the law to undermine people for hundreds of years and then expect that to have no effect on their community whatsoever. And what I'd love for people to ask themselves is maybe you didn't just make good choices, maybe you also were given better ones. This is me on the day I arrived to Phillips Exeter Academy, a boarding school in New Hampshire. I want you to look at what I was wearing. It's move-in day. I'm in a Lacoste pleated skirt, Ferragamo shoes, which are hard and heeled, a blazer probably from J. Crew, and like a Ralph Lauren ruffled shirt. The girl who would end up becoming my best friend said the first time she laid eyes on me, she was like, I'm not gonna like that girl. She's dressed like George Washington. That school at the time had a very strict dress code, and the boys had to wear ties and the girls had to wear like just a certain level of clothing every day to class. And, you got in trouble if you didn't show up correct. I want you to note something. I was not cosplaying like this. This was who I was. Like, I already owned all this stuff, the way I'd been raised, the events I'd gone to, things like that. This was very natural for me. How many times do you think, though, that I had to defend that in the common room of the hall I lived in? We talked yesterday about the lady who walked up to me at the Met and was like, where are you going? And she wanted to know that because of what I was wearing. Well, this didn't start as a woman. This started back when I was a kid, and even as a baby, long before that. So yesterday we talked about how the woman who asked me that question very rudely, she was from a certain age demographic. So we could maybe give her a pass. I know, but we could say, look, she grew up in an area and in an age where there's a lot of segregation. She's just not, her brain hasn't caught up to the times. That's what's going on. That's not what would happen in the common room of my hall. And I want you to know, my year at Phillips Exeter was one of the best years of my life to this date. I do not care if it sounds like, oh, you peaked in high school. That was a peak. It was a peak year. It's a great school. It was a great place to go. I had great hallmates. I had great classmates. Everything's fine. But I will never forget the day that I got asked where I learned to dress, how I was dressed, and why I did it. Mind you, these are kids who have we all have the same dress code. The dress code did not change based on rank or year or color. It was the same dress code. I was asked that question by a young girl who came from New York society in an area that later I would move to, where I am now. Not now, Thanksgiving, I'm in Florida. But anyways, you get the point. It's not an age thing. It's a class thing. Okay, sometimes it's an age thing. Sometimes it's purely a race thing. But this is why it's so important to talk about how race and class are technologies that work together to determine and slot different stories about who we are, what we're owed, and why we have what we have. Because if you think about it, this kid wasn't asking, how did you put on your clothes? How did you pick your clothes? She was asking why. Basically, how does someone like you know how to behave like someone like me? Because the math isn't mathing, or the society isn't societying in the way I've been taught it works. In the world that's been curated for me, you don't fit into it. So you need to explain yourself. And that's why when this doll came out, 2011, as we said before, I was thrilled. And I was also sad because what I would have given as a child to have a well-dressed little black girl. In the Addie books, which are wonderful and amazing, Addie dreams of being free and she dreams of being reunited with her family. She's hardworking and she's industrious. In the Cecile Ray books, she dreams of becoming an opera singer. She dreams of what dresses she's going to wear to her parties and, what kind of food's going to be served at the big event. She's also industrious. Her family's hardworking. They're from a big community of free black people who are living their best lives in America and just trying to enjoy it. The American story would have you believe that people are in the classes that they're in purely based on, merit, purely based on the hard work of their ancestors and themselves. The history of America breaks all that down. And the clothing matters because, as we've started to discuss and look at with this doll specifically, clothing is how we denote class. It's how we denote rank in a country that has committed to being class blind and pretending that there isn't a class system and there isn't a caste system. When you read books like Carol Anderson's White Rage, it becomes impossible to deny that we are living in the aftermath of centuries of decisions that were made to make sure that there was a class and caste system of where resources went, where schools got investments, where people got land, who got protected, who the police worked for. And all of that was justified through ideas of race, through beliefs about who was owed what. And the clothing and the home ownership and all of that reflected it. The story was that black people were just lazy, and that's why they don't have what other people have. And the story was like, look, we have to enslave them. We have to keep them down with black codes and all these kind of things, because if we don't, they won't work. They'll just do nothing and resort to lives of crime. It was a way of saying we have what we have because of who we are, not because of economic choices that people before us made that are still continuing to have detrimental effects on other people who had no choice but were born into this. As we've seen in the comments, well-dressed black people, well-dressed black women, they overturn long-standing old ideas about black femininity, black industrious, black excellence, and black aspiration. And at the end of the day, what has always bothered racists, white supremacists, those kind of people who, even not people that far, maybe people who are just, they have their ideas and they don't know where they got those ideas. What's bothered them is not the existence of black people. Black people like Addie or this girl existing, that's not a problem. It's not a problem in America. The problem is when they aspire. The problem is when they think they're people, when they think that the promises of America apply to them. What I was wearing at the Met, what I was wearing at school, was literally in line with the rules. That wasn't the problem. The problem was me showing up that way challenged a narrative about what people like me and darker are supposed to be and look like. What our place is in a society that, for the most part, we've not examined our ideas about race or caste. Because if we examined our ideas about race, we'd have to think about classism, we'd have to think about why the idea of race was invented. And nobody really wants to think about that, because then we'd have to look at how we structure our society now, how we let certain tax brackets get away with certain things. And that's uncomfortable. So we retire those thoughts and we retire those dolls. I'm 15 years old. I'm dressed up, I'm excited. My hometown orchestra, it's world class, well known, they're taking their intermission. And an elderly woman leans over and asks me what my thoughts are on the composer. I gather my thoughts. I think about my classical music education. I think about the context of the concerto and the piano and the fact that I've been classically trained for 12 years at that point, and I've competed, and my brother's violin teacher's up there on that stage, and I start to answer her, and I'm just answering her as if she really meant that question. And then her face completely changes, like the color just drains out of it, and she looks horrified. It'll take another 10 years for me to find out that every single season there are multiple tickets, not 10, not 20, way more than that, that never get sold at that particular cultural institution. And there were some community members, like the woman asking me that question, who were saying, why don't we donate those tickets to local high schools in the area? And you know what? That multi-million-dollar institution that claimed that they wanted to enrich the community and have a diverse area and all that kind of jazz said, no. So guess what happens every single season? There are tons of shows, tons of concerts, all these different things where tons of the back rows, they're just empty, because they would rather have those rows empty than have certain kinds of kids sitting in those seats. 12 years later, I would find out in a women's league I belonged to that was for juvenile justice and looking critically at our community and how we could change and what we could do to help with voting and all those kind of things. I found out that one of those women had tried to take her mentees to that particular institution. And she said the children that she would take were well behaved, they were quiet, they, knew what to do. And she still got complaints from fellow community members that the child was noisy and ill-behaved and she shouldn't bring the child back here. And she just was shocked at those accusations because they weren't true. But let's get back to the lady who thought she wanted to start a conversation with me. She didn't. And one of you brilliantly mentioned in one of my other videos that you've also noticed, a lot of you have noticed, that there are people that ask you certain questions when you're in a certain space to kind of test if you really belong there or not. They look at you, they look at what you look like, and they have these assumptions. And rather than change their assumptions or change their narrative, they decide they need to investigate why you're there. But worse than that, what so many of you have brought up, is that it's actually not even just about sussing out the situation. It's more about how can I have a conversation with you in which I assert the fact that I know more than you and I belong here and you don't. And when it is revealed to that individual that you actually do know what you're talking about and that you are part of the cultural conversation, they lose interest real quick in that conversation because they weren't actually interested in a conversation to begin with. That lady had nothing to say to me. She had nothing to add to that conversation. She actually thought she knew more than me about this specific composer and this specific piece. And what she didn't realize was that she was talking to somebody who could actually run circles around her. And she didn't expect that because she saw a small brown girl in a sea of old people. This is kind of like that thing where older men, they're happy to talk to young, cute girls, and then the conversation just like abruptly ends when they realize that they can't show you anything because you've been to the countries they're talking about and you've seen the stuff that they want to show you. That power dynamic of them knowing more than you, them being more, worldly and aware, that's what they're looking for. And when they don't have that, they just lose interest in the relationship, they lose interest in the connection. I don't tell you these stories because I need like an oppression biscuit and I need people to affirm my hard, terrible life. What have I overcome? Nothing. I tell these stories because they're real revealing about certain ideas that are still messing with other people's lives in really bad ways. The lie of most American capitalism is that if you just work really hard and you do all the rules and you bow down to the right people, you too can have everything. And once you get there, everything will be fine. You'll have great health care, you'll have a good life, you'll be accepted, and no one will treat you badly. Just work harder. People say to me, oh, is it hard assimilating? I didn't assimilate into anything. I was literally born here. I just happened to be in a super privileged position and look like this. And, that irritates some people because they're like, wait, this doesn't go with the narrative of, what we think about your group. But anyway, I'm here to report from this perch that what the historians say is true. That there are certain kinds of people that will tell you, oh, if black people were just less lazy, if black people just worked harder, then we'd accept them, then we'd be cool with them. And then you show up as you are with your brown or black self, and they still have an issue with you. These people would like to believe that their anti-blackness is a response to black people's bad behavior, but really, it doesn't work like that at all. They have anti-black thoughts and ideas from a history they refuse to acknowledge happened. And then some of us show up in these spaces that were specifically designed just for them, and they feel some type of way about it, but they can't explain why. They don't even know why, because they refuse to know. They refuse to dig deep into why they feel the way that they feel, why they think the way that they think. And rather than change their ideas or change their perception or change their narrative, they decide you need to change. Your story, how you got here, what you're doing, the odds you face, all that kind of stuff, they need you to account for it. And they need to give you a really good reason for why it is the way it is. And it better match up with their old prejudices. So a long story long, all of this kind of thing is just a really great reminder that for all this rhetoric about everyone pulling themselves up by the bootstraps and then getting to belong and getting to have a good life, at the end of the day, it wasn't built for certain people. And when you get there, people are real happy to remind you of that. Is that a major, terrible oppression? I mean, it's a bother, it's a nuisance, but it's not like the end of the world. But is it revealing? Yes. And you know what? Call it out for what it is. And if you know better, you can critique it and you can say, hey, I see you. So much of this crap depends on this kind of thing remaining invisible and nobody talking about it. It's one of the reasons why in the 1%, in the 10%, in the wealthy echelons of society, the whole thing is don't talk about money, don't talk about class. It's distasteful. Of course it's distasteful. What it's built on is disgusting. So, there you go. Being Black and upper class has in no way been a persecution for me. It has, however, been a front row seat to a kind of white rage that affects everyone, no matter what social, racial category you slot into in society. This rage flies under the radar, it's made invisible, it's been around for a long time, it runs on the same economic, political playbook that it has since the end of the Civil War, and it's hurting all of you. All of you. Unless you're Jeff Bezos, but that's not you. A very small example of this is a couple of years back, I was all dressed up with black and white cousins. We're all dressed up. There's a good group of us, maybe 12, and we're going to the symphony. This symphony is manned by tons of volunteers, right? People who want to help you, people who are excited to see young people come to the symphony. And we get there and I've got my 8 or 9 tickets all connected. And this older white woman, member of my community, is doing the scanning. I can tell from the get-go, she doesn't really want to help me. She's peeved. And I'm thinking, why? I've got this huge group of people coming in. Like, this is a win for the local community symphony. So she scans all my tickets, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. She gets to the 8th or 9th one. I don't remember how many exactly we had. It doesn't beep. Now, mind you, I had to pick up these tickets at will call with an ID, with my name. And she knows this because she's a volunteer before I come to her. She scans the last ticket that has the symphony's name on it. I mean, it's got all the official stuff. And she explodes with this quiet anger and this total frustration. Like, she's just like, she knew it. She knew I was a thief. And she loudly, in front of everybody, accuses me basically of stealing a ticket and attaching it to the legitimate tickets, which is how you should do crime. Now, that's a ridiculous thing. We sorted it out. We found out that yes, while she was following the rules as to what to do if, I guess, a thief comes and attaches a fake ticket to a bunch of real tickets, she did not know how to use her scanner properly. But instead of having customer service, instead of thinking about how one should approach this, she responded with the anger that was already inside of her. She'd already assumed and knew that this kind of place was not for people like us. And she didn't want to have to let us in. And if she could get us out on a technicality, on a quiet rule, and she threw up her hands, I can't help you, I can't do anything, she would. That is a very tiny, low stakes example of the work Carol Anderson, as a historian, has done in looking at the documented and demonstrated examples of rulemaking and code making that certain people in higher classes have used to quietly make sure that lower class whites and Black people with wealth cannot get ahead. When Carol Anderson decided to write White Rage, it had come after she had been asked for the Washington Post to write an op-ed in the wake of August 2014 when the Black Lives Matter riots were exploding. Her critique was that we were looking at Black rage. We were looking at physical anger, destruction of property, all those different things. And she was making it very clear in that first essay and then in her book that you can't understand this rage unless you understand the other kind of rage. That's the rage that uses your political power, your legal power, to write laws and little caveats into things to make sure that you undermine the wealth of people believed to be Black, and you make sure that people who are believed to be white, who are in lower classes, never politically come together with those people. Now, who does that cost? It costs the democracy, and it costs all sorts of other classes that aren't in the ruling class. Because what they're doing is you're undermining, as she shows in her book, you're undermining voting rights. You're undermining this ability for the lower classes to look at each other and go, hey, our taxes should be going toward X, Y, and Z. Carol's research, I should say Miss Anderson's research, is an invitation to look at the kind of responses that have legally always existed to the advancement of Black people or the advancement of lower classes coming together and saying, this is how we would like to be treated. She's making it clear that if we don't look at the playbook, we're gonna miss it in today's age. It's not something that happened back then. It's something that's happening now. We're going to be looking at this work because there is going to come a point in time when you are trying to rightfully access something that is yours, and you're going to be told that if it is given to you or if you want it, it's probably because you stole it or you shouldn't have it. As a historian, she's making these brilliant connections about how this is an assault on Black middle class, but then you can go out and see it's also the middle class as a whole. It's really important that we contextually understand our history because we're all bound up together, and all of our lives and our pursuit of happiness and liberty, it's connected. And there are reasons that people don't want you to understand that, because you become dangerous when you know that. You're less of a victim and you're more of a threat. So I'm excited to read this book. If you've read this book, if you finished it, if you know of any other things of Carol Anderson's that you just really particularly want to look at, please write in the comments.
So ladies, let me know what you think in the comments. Have you been through any of these experiences? Have you grown up in the lower, middle, or upper class within society? Have you read any books on racism? Have you studied? Is this the first time you've ever heard a critical deconstruction of race relations in America. And let me know about any racism that you have experienced in your life. So stay pretty, ladies, and tune in every day for a new video.